much, everybody, for coming. I had no idea how this was going to go, and there's suddenly a lot more of you than I invited, so that's great. I hope everybody has some beverages and food. First, I want to thank the Hub, because this is a fantastic location for all of your events and needs. You can keep that in mind. Thank you to Annette, who really put the energy and zeal, as she demonstrated in front of you. She really put that energy and zeal into this program. I'd like to thank Lawrence over here too, my host co-working buddy, who this event frankly is his fault. I mentioned that my second book of poetry called Deep Breath is releasing soon in October, and he said, oh, before you leave in 1 week to fly to Germany and move there, we should have an event for you. And then Annette overheard that, and this is history, this is what happened. So thank you, Lawrence, thank you, Annette. I'd like to thank my husband and partner, Joachim, for wading through the muddle with me. He is the person who has listened to every one of my poems. He comes home from work, he's like sweaty, and I say, hey, sit down, I gotta read you a poem. So he's a trooper for that. Okay, so without further ado, this event is kind of to celebrate poetry in context. So yes, my book is coming out, Deep Breath, but it is a celebration of art in general, because poetry shouldn't exist alone, and it doesn't. No one creates poetry alone. They create it in the flux of everything, of all types of art. So tonight we're going to have readings from fiction. An established Hawai'i literary giant, Wallace, is here to read. We're going to have non-fiction from Stuart Coleman of Eddie Would Go fame, and we're going to have some musical performances. A one-night-only trio of violin, mandolin, and melodica, which I don't think you'd find on YouTube. We're going to play 2 songs for you, and then I'm going to read you some poems. So just to kind of start off the evening, Deep Breath is a book of American sonnets, which isn't, those 2 words don't typically go together. You won't find those in the high school textbooks. Sonnets are 14 lines, metered in some kind of variety, and American qualifies that to be a sort of chaotic release of energy and sort of some American ideals like freedom, like individualism, like diversity, things that are distinctly American relative to the rest of the world. These poems I wrote while I was cycling alone from San Diego to Seattle, and I got hit by a car at one point, so I had to come back for a month, and I was in this very contemplative zone. I had so much time to think. I was completely alone for the most part. The beach parks were not full at all. So I had all of this time to think, and I wrote a lot of poetry. And when I looked over those poems, I realized they were all sonnets, and form is not something I've ever been devoted to, so this was surprising to me. They were all sonnets. Came to find that I think that's just the formula for contemplation. I think that's just what William Shakespeare, what Petrarch, what Dante found with those 14 lines. They found how long it takes to think of something, consider it, connect it, and conclude it. It takes 14 lines. So then I had all of these sonnets on my hands, and I thought, okay, that's going to be my next collection. I couldn't really call them sonnets per se, because they didn't really pay as much attention to meter and rhyme as classic sonnets do. But then I came across John Ashbery and Terence Hayes and Wanda Coleman, who wrote in the style of American sonnets, which is just basically sonnets but looser. I mean, anytime you attach American to anything, it's just that but a little bit looser, if you know what I mean. So, but first, to start off, poetry in context, right? That's our thesis for the evening. We're going to start with some poems that really started everything for me. So we're going to start with William Sotar. He's a Glaswegian poet. This poem is called Aince Upon a Day. It was the first poem for me, the first poem ever. I memorized it when I was in primary school. I was living in Glasgow. My dad was a University of Glasgow researcher, so we went to Downhill Primary School, which was a former insane asylum, and really felt like it. It had the vibes. And P4 had to memorize this poem, Aince Upon a Day, for a cultural cafe, and it just stuck with me. It's a Glaswegian English, which some people would not qualify as English. It's very difficult to understand, which is fitting for poem, because people think that poetry is really difficult. So after you hear this poem, you'll just know it. Everything else gets easier to understand. Okay, so this is Aince Upon a Day. Aince upon a day, my mother said to me, Don ye ripe, and don ye clipe, and don ye tell a lee. For if ye clipe a craw shall shame ye, and if ye gripe a daw shall name ye. and a wee snail shall hease its horny zoot, gin ye tell Lee. Aince upon a day, as I walked down the lane, I met a craw and mony a daw and a snail upon Elkstane. Up Gadel craw didn't shame me, up Gadel daw and didn't name me, but that wee snail heased its horny zoot and hiked em rune and rune a boot and goggled at me. Thank you kindly. Yes, please feel free to clap and to snap and to heckle if you want. You can heckle, you can throw things. You have rights as an audience. You gotta let your voice be heard. This next poem is by Billy Collins, who was a poet laureate of the US, from 2001 to 2003. He is a very famous, accessible poet. This poet I'm going to read is called Sonnet. It is a good introduction to what sonnets are, a very literal but quirky introduction. So, sonnet. All we need is 14 lines. Well, 13 now, and after this next one, just a dozen to launch a little ship on love's storm-tossed seas. Then, only 10 more left, like rows of beans. How easily it goes, unless you get Elizabethan and insist the iambic bongos must be played, and rhymes positioned at the ends of lines, one for every station of the cross. But hang on here, while we make the turn into the final 6, where all will be resolved, where longing and heartache will find an end, where Laura will tell Petrarch to put down his pen, take off those crazy medieval tights, blow out the lights, and come at last to bed. And now, to put that kind of qualifier of the American sonnet, I'm going to read you from Terence Hayes' collections of American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassins, which was written during the reign of Donald Trump, if you can imagine. This one, they're all called American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassins. This one really puts a little bit of a definition on what an American sonnet is. I lock you in an American sonnet that is part prison, part panic closet, a little room in a house set aflame. I lock you in a form that is part music box, part meat grinder to separate the song of the bird from the bone. I lock your persona in a dream-inducing sleeper hold while your better selves watch from the bleachers. I make you both Jim and Crow here. As the Crow, you undergo a beautiful catharsis, trapped one night in the shadows of the gym. As the Jim, the feeling of crow shit dropping to your floors is not unlike the stars falling from the pep rally posters on your walls. I make you a box of darkness with a bird in its heart. Voltas of acoustics, instinct, and metaphor, it is not enough to love you. It is not enough to want you destroyed. Okay, so that's enough context. So that last one was pretty heavy. Now we're going to move on to a reading of fiction. I've asked my readers for tonight to provide me with a 7-word sonnet, a you and haiku, if you will. For my first guest, Don Wallace, he needs a little bit more introduction than that, because he certainly is quite a literary giant in Hawaii. He grew up in LA. He went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is the premier MFA writing program in probably the world. Crazy it comes from Iowa, but I guess there's not much else to do, so. I feel like I can say that because I was born in Iowa. I can, but yeah. He moved to Manhattan, New York, not Kansas, I checked. He worked as a writer for 27 years. To put that into context, my husband just turned 27 on Saturday, so that's Don Wallace's writing career over there. He served as writer, as editor, as executive editor, as startup teams for, magazines and journals we've all heard of, like the New York Times, like Time Inc., like Hearst Magazine, and many, many others. Then he settled down in Hawaii with his wife, Mindy Pennybacker, who is a star advertiser. She just holds all the articles on her shoulders. She's also in our audience tonight. He basically was involved with every literary magazine and journal on the island after winning a very impressive award for contributions to Hawaiian literature. He and creative director James Charisma started the Hawaii Review of Books to bridge the gap between who's actually writing the island's literature. So THROB, as it's called, the Hawaii Review of Books, it basically empowers island people to write their own literature, which is fantastic. It's how it should be, really. So Don Wallace's 7-word bio that he gave me was inspired by Nina Simone. Oh Lord, don't let me be misunderstood. So Don Wallace, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Josie.
You are very
welcome. Oh, yeah. So great. Thank you, everybody, but mostly, let's hear it for Josie. Who else just... Really, this is her night, and she turns it over to, like, the kapuna. Germany is going to love her. And I'm bringing a beer up in honor of the fact that this is like the first real reading we've been to, or performance or anything, it seems like in 100 years for me, but for a lot of us, you know, this used to be the norm. So Josie, thanks for bringing that back, at least in my sphere. Yeah, and I'll put the beer down. So I wanted to say, again, it's great to see so many people here for literature, for getting together, for generously supporting the young writer, the youngest writer in the room. But she's really, really powerful, and she's really focused, if you know her. She came to me by my next door neighbor, who by some coincidence is also our reader, Stuart Coleman. The Hawaii Review of Books started about 1.5 years ago. I was at Honolulu Magazine, I still am. And we wanted to expand what goes on in literature beyond the thing that's always determined by advertising on one hand and hits on the other. So if you go to HawaiiReviewOfBooks.com, you'll see this magnificent visual experience curated by James Charisma, who is back there hiding behind the mask. And if you don't know James Charisma, well, he's charismatic. He's guys, girls. But he's also a contributor to everything, and often single-handedly behind the scenes is writing entire magazines in this town, and I can't name them. He's so talented. He also is a great writer. So Stuart says, Don, you need someone to work on this thing? And I said, yes. And he said, I want to introduce you to Josie. Josie comes and organizes our newsletter, writes it, creates it, sends it out, which is a turning point for an organization. We only have 2 employees and no one gets paid. But we've gotten great reach. We're being read all over the world and in New York, and stuff like that is going on. I have to say that Audible Books has been in touch, contacted us, and signed up a huge number of writers in this town because of the Hawaii Review of Books, and some of Honolulu too. Because I do still work there, and if you haven't seen the 50 Essential Hawaii Books that I did a few years ago, check it out. That's it's a real commons of literature. Speaking of Honolulu, I have another creative director here, James Nakamura, in the black shirt and the black mask. He's also a great writer, and his work has been in the Hawaii Review of Books. The Disappearance of Beach Glass in Hanapepe. It's a wonderful story, real story. Next to him is our executive editor, newly promoted Katrina Valcour, who is amazing. And next to her is Maria Kanai, Maria here, they're all 3 here, guys. Really, like, Katrina and Maria all go back to the Honolulu Weekly, where Mindy was the editor of the Weekly. And if you remember the Weekly, yeah, the Weekly was political, the Weekly was art, and the Weekly was free. So we have some of that spirit at Throb too. There's so many people here I could recognize. Most of our street, Hibiscus Drive, is here. So, Ellen and Russell, and gosh, who else we got? Oh, we got Pat Godfrey, who's a contributor to Throb. She wrote how Pia Valley was saved. She saved it herself. And I know she doesn't want me to talk about it. She'll publish an article about it, but she won't talk about it. And my wife is waving at me like saying, what? What?
Just read your...
Read what? And I want to thank my mother. Okay, we moved to fiction. First, the basis, and I don't have an agent, damn it. Okay, so I wrote a memoir, came out in 2014, called The French House. And Mindy and I, back in 1984, were called up by an old professor friend on it. We had visited this island off the coast of Brittany called Belle-Île. And we were backpacking around and thoroughly miserable. And we spent the winter in Belle-Île. And 40 years later, we're still going back because we bought a ruin. So this is a book that's about buying a ruin in France when you have no money, you're broke. We were actually squatters in New York, living when we bought this because we were so offended we couldn't get a place in New York. So this is really, it's not your average year in Provence. To put it mildly, every New York editor who turned it down said, there's so much about cesspools. It's really interesting because Stuart is an expert on cesspools. And I've been trying to get him to write an article on cesspools in Hawaii for Throb. So this is all like totally QAnon connected. So the memoir, it has a blurb by Meryl Streep, it's kind of under the radar, but it's going to be read by a native Hawaiian Chinese guy for Audible, Typo Schwab. So I just made the selection today after auditioning all the readers, and that was exciting. Who am I going to reject next? So the problem with memoirs is once you write one, you can't write another one for a while. And I'm actually a fiction writer, and I've always thought of myself as one, but what you discover in the writing world is you have to have someone who's going to buy your work. And so I sold the first novel, and I thought it was going to be easy, cheesy peasy after that, and it wasn't. Fortunately, I just kept working in magazines and reviewing books. I was reviewing hundreds of books for Kirkus, as was Mindy in New York. And eventually, I realized if I'm going to do it, and I did a book on high school football, One Great Game, which is considered to be the other book about high school football. Friday Night Lights, right? But the thing is, I've made myself an expert in very arcane fields. Now, what do you do to follow up a memoir? Well, you pick a novel and create a novel that's set on the same island off the coast of Brittany, Belle-Île. And so in the last 5 years, I've been constructing and writing 500-page manuscripts and throwing them out and bragging to people I was done, and then a year later going, well, I started over again. So no one's read this. Maybe someone in New York is reading it at this moment. The name is called The Savage Coast, and there is a savage coast on Belle-Île. It's called Côte Sauvage, which no one could pronounce of my Audible readers, by the way. And this is the prologue, Western Gate Cat Cafe. We'll have tea now and wait for the fireworks, says Nura from deep in the cushioned back seat of the hire car, turned half away to not wake the baby in her arms. I have to pee anyway. Her sister Jamila laughs and pokes their youngish brother, Hadi, who is hunched over his game player, headphones clamped over his ears. What? He asks. Jamila lifts one earmuff and says, tell the driver to stop, say we need to use the cafe's facility, perhaps stay a while. Hadi is 14 and skinny and delicate, but he must be the one to address the driver. Then it will seem they are being haya, modest, proper, cautious in this foreign country, making their disappearance all the more confounding, more likely to be a kidnapping. Throwing off searchers for even an hour can make all the difference. Nura has thought this out carefully. She has been delegating decisions to Hadi lately because she needs Hadi to grow up fast, learn to project authority, not always deflect and dissemble if they are to survive this trip. At least his secret life online has given him a good start, even if placing him in danger of exposure. He has explained that he can always tell when he is chatting with someone who is one of the watchers of the kingdom. She's not so sure about that. Hadi slides the clear panel, lowers his voice, tries to make it gruff. Yeah, driver, cat cafe stop. The salt and pepper, freckled man at the wheel nods. They have passed time at the cafe the previous 2 days. It is for women only, women like these Saudi tourists who are not allowed to do anything on their vacation in Escala. The driver has met their brothers, uncles, and father, knows their routine too. The men do all the things they are forbidden to do at home. It is a game. Because of men like that, the driver makes a living taking women like these to see the sights from behind black tinted windows. The Western Gate Cat Cafe is a familiar, safe stop. But if these women were to ask him to take them somewhere forbidden, he would shrug. If there is more money in it, why not let two play that game? Men who are hypocrites shouldn't be surprised to be made fools of. The hire car pulls up at the cafe. As the women exit, the boy Hadi asks to be let off at the department store a block away. The driver looks past him to Nura, eldest of the siblings, for her approval. She nods. Hadi has soft eyes and a kind glow. The first time Nura handed him her baby, he knew how to hold it. He often reaches for the baby when their father isn't around. The driver has seen it all what Saudis do on vacation in Morocco, and has also seen enough of Hadi to decide this boy will grow up to be one of those who go to Tangier on his vacations, take the boat to Spain to find others of his kind. It must be a lonely life back in Saudi Arabia, and a frightening one for a boy like that. Exiting the car, Hadi takes hold of his large duffel, which in the last 2 days has disgorged an endless cornucopia of comic books, graphic novels, a movie player, and a game player. It must be heavy to judge from how the boy strains to lift it. Why he needs to lug all his precious toys around a department store is another question. But there are benches and tables there where he will undoubtedly sit and eat his fast food and watch other lonely boys. The driver does not judge. The driver drives. Okay, now we're in a chat room, so you have to imagine that, this kapuna is imitating, internet talk. Are you a bad girl or are you a bad girl? I think bad. A very bad, but not your type. How do you know I'm not your type? I think I saw you at the mall that day. Was that you with your mother? My sister. Die, die, die. Nothing can kill Freeboy S.A. Ha ha ha, missed me. Here's an RPG up your filthy rebel ass. Shit. Time. Gotta go. See ya. Sore loser. No, for real. Tomorrow same? No. Why not? Going on a trip. Thought he was on a trip. This bigger. Where to, Mr. Newsreel No Lie SA? Moderf. Moerf? Like real Earth? Something like that. Oh, Frodo or a ring bearer or a hobbit? Gotta go, serious. Later, wish me luck, no kidding. Okay, luck, no kidding. Kill me before you go. Done. Oh my God, hisses Jamila. Look at Hadi. Not Hadi, Halima, corrects Nura. He stands in the cafe entrance, not shyly, more confident and with such good posture. The abaya moves like a black waterfall as he follows the hostess, a herd of skittish kittens parting before them. She leads him to a cubicle where he places the duffel. Then he flashes bright eyes and comes straight to the table, hips twitching. But at the last moment, he pauses to bend low and scratch a wandering orange cat on its head, milking his entrance for every drop of drama. Halima, says Nura, so nice to see you. Come sit by me and let me show you my darling baby girl. You don't have to wear your hijab here, teases Jamila. Hadi makes a serious face. Oh no, I will stay modest, not like you bad girls. Laughter from an adjoining table tells him the deception is working. Let's have some tea and sandwiches, says Nura, adding quietly, and cake, and maybe our last meal for a while. I packed energy bars. Hadi bends over the menu to muffle his voice. 3 bottles of water, big ones. Hello there, how are you today? Cries a woman at a far table waving. They wave back. She's the one they asked on the second day, after almost approaching several and losing their nerve. Posters on Snapchat had warned of spies. The time was short, but she seemed hardy as well as sophisticated, like their aunt who goes to Paris every year. She gave off a sympathetic, perhaps even pitying curiosity, shooting them several kindly glances. Their guarded conversation had led to others and texts before a meeting with another woman who wore a chic dress that showed her legs and explained she was a tour guide. Women only, for girls who want to get out of the house and take a nice long trip. She looked at Hadi. Are you that kind of girl? After eating, they pay the bill and text the driver that they are staying another hour or 2. The cats are so fluffy and so much fun. Nura and Halima don their hijabs. At the curb, a small sedan is waiting. Inside, the tour guide hands them money belts for their passports and wallets. They give her the envelope. She counts the dollars very carefully as the car cruises slowly down the Corniche to a spot overlooking the breakwater and harbor. They stay in the car. By sundown, black boats begin to collect a few hundred yards offshore. Their brothers and father must be frantic looking for them. They hope they don't beat the driver, but they suspect this will happen, having taken their share of beatings. Nora still carries bruises from her last one, after she complained that her husband shouldn't take a second wife so soon after the baby's birth. Jamila carries a mark from their father's hand. Nora and Jamila can't stand another minute of this, much less a lifetime, but they fear that Hadi, already attracting unprovoked abuse from their father and brothers, won't even make it to adulthood. This yearly vacation is their only chance to escape. For months, Nora and Hadi pieced together passwords to one of the several of the family's side bank accounts and quietly opened their own in a different bank. They kept the transfers small until this morning. As the fireworks start to go off around 8 o'clock, they count the 5th boat moving towards shore. "That is yours," says the guide. "Good luck, ladies." Hadi is still in his abaya. "You have paid for special handling, so the trip to France shouldn't be too difficult. But you will encounter the big ocean and will be afraid. Just remember what awaits you on the other shore: freedom." Then she hands them bright yellow life jackets, still in their transparent plastic wrappings. I gotta say more, right? Well, you know that in the next chapter, someone is going to be on a tiny island in France, right? Okay, so that's where the novel is heading. And Josie, thank you. You guys are the first to hear it. Yeah. Who knows? And before I go, I do want to call out a couple of Throb contributors. Chris McKinney is in the house, who, as we all know, is Hawaii's greatest social realist novelist. And now he's a science fiction novelist of great renown. He's won several awards this year for Midnight Water City. And Robert Barkley, Bob Barkley's in the house. He has created 2 or 3 publishing houses. He brought Ian McMillan's last novel, posthumous novel, to print, and he is the author of many books, including Belal, the best book of the Pacific Islands, I would say. I think it's been made into a movie, Bob?
It's in progress.
A movie? Yeah, that's movies, okay. And now we're going to leave it to Josie. Sorry I took up all your time.
All right, thank you. Yeah, another round of applause for Dawn. We're going to move into the rhythmic side of this event now. Like I said, that one night only trio. We've got our violinist, Kendall Schmidt. There she is. And my husband, my dear husband, Joachim, will be on melodica, if anybody knew that's what that was called. So just to introduce Kendall Schmidt very briefly. Kendall, I met her at the Hiking Hawaii Cafe when I first got to the island 2-3 years ago. We were colleagues then. She quickly rose to manager and then to co-owner, and she is the reason why that cafe is still in business because of her. Because single-handedly, while she was raising 3 kids during a pandemic. So Kendall is not only a professional violinist, she does weddings, by the way, but she's also a good friend and a fantastic heart. So
Thank you.
we're first gonna play for you Norwegian Wood by the Beattles. And then we're going to play Eddie Vedder, the Rise. Yes.
Thank you. Love you, Josie. Yeah. Wait, now should we go, right? Yes. You're too far away. Okay. yeah, start over. Thank you. turn it off, I just moved it back. It should be on.
Hello.
Hello.
Testing.
Testing. Testing again.
Hello. Okay. Okay.
How do we do?
I don't know if maybe. I don't know why it keeps going on. Do I just keep going? Or is it gonna you gotta be careful. This microphone's a woman, that's for sure. I say that as a woman and with full respect to all women. This one certainly sounds like it's working. Okay, can I get a round of applause? Just put some energy back in. All right, so we're going to move on to the non-fiction side of things, where you get to learn some fun facts. You get to learn about surfing and legends and heroes of the island. My original draft for my introduction for Stuart Coleman was about 600 words, so that got cut down really quickly. Fortunately, I don't have 4 hours, so I can just introduce all my friends, but here we go. Stuart also provided me with a 7-word bio, which I'm going to save for last. Stuart is an activist. He is the director for Wastewater Innovations and Alternatives, which aims to eradicate the cesspool problem in Hawaii. He's also a writer. He's the best-selling author, the award-winning author of Eddie Would Go, and we're coming up on the 20th anniversary edition in February, which is good. And he used to be a high school teacher, an art dealer, lots of things. But first of all, he's my friend, and he's also a poet. And those things I like both of those things. I like friends and I like poetry. But you can just tell that he injects poetry into everything that he does. Even his nonfiction, you can tell he's a poet. His emails, you can tell he's a poet. His bio is a little bit understated. It's kind of Stuart-esque, but if Stuart were to write a legit bio, it would be more than 7 words, I'd say. So Stuart Coleman in half a haiku, aspiring writer, surfer, storyteller, and wave maker. Stuart Coleman.
Hugged her and cracked her back at the same time. She was like, what was that? I was hoping it was my back because it needs to be cracked bad. What a fun night. I mean, honestly, with the pandemic, it's the first reading that I've been to, but also you add in the music, the poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and just lots of good people. I'm so stoked to be here and glad to see you guys. Josie mentioned that her husband Yoko has worked for Vi and has been a really good friend, and so this is kind of a going away celebration for them. And they've just become great friends of ours, and Hawaii's going to miss them. Their artistic way of looking at the world. They have a great group of friends, and they just put together things like this, which is pretty kick-ass. Yeah. So let's give her a round of applause. Before I do a reading, I thought I would just start with some stories, because that's what writing this book was about. It was a 4-year effort, and it was just about collecting stories about some of the most interesting people in Hawaii. And as Josie mentioned, it's the 20th anniversary of the publication of Eddie Would Go in October. And Mindy will appreciate the story. When the first review came out in the paper, it was one of those moments. It was my first book. I put my heart and soul into it, and I had no idea how well it was going to be received. And there was a review in the paper, and I can remember opening it with trembling hands, because I honestly didn't know if it was going to end up like a bad episode of Survivor where you get kicked off the island. I was like, this could go either way. And the first line was, "Only a mainland haole could have written this book." And I was like, why did you start with a line like that? It's like, maybe people didn't notice I was haole. I was like, yeah, very faint chance of that. And so it was very interesting, because he went on to say that Eddie was such a mythic figure in Hawaii that you needed kind of someone who was an outsider to really take a fresh look at this person. And yeah, because there are students writing essays. Now there's an Eddie contest. Essay contest is the largest in the state. And these kids write about Eddie, and you get I'm one of the judges in the student essay contest. And you get great lines like, my trinity of heroes is Bruce Lee, Jesus Christ, and Eddie Aikau. I'm like, good on you. Yeah, you'll go far with those 3. Never thought would have put those 3 together, but so yeah, writing the book was a real pleasure. And Eddie grew up. If you guys know Punch Bowl, behind Punch Bowl in Paoa. They were caretakers of the Chinese graveyard back there. And it's a huge graveyard. And they used to have the biggest luau's in the entire island. And people used to go from the mayors to, the most surfer-ish bums out there that didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And it was just a great mingling. And talking to people later, they were like, this was one of the few places that everyone could mingle together from all races and backgrounds, and you were always welcome there. But they serve something called swipe. How many people have heard of swipe? Yeah. Swipe is a homemade pineapple juice. They go up to the North Shore, steal a bunch of pineapples, pour them out, put them in a big, big drum, and then put more alcohol and ingredients than you can imagine and let it ferment for like 2 days. And then they'd freeze the pineapples and they'd pour it back in. And Peter Cole, who we just had his memorial recently, called them the Howley Slayers. Because he said, they tasted so good and sweet. And he's like, the first one, your lips would get a little numb. And he's like, the second one, I remember, kind of like, I can't feel the right side of my face. And then he said, the next morning he'd wake up and there would be bodies all over the graveyard, just where people had passed out. And it was known that you could stay until the next day. And, there'd probably be another party that went on the next day. So this was the kind of like outrageous, they were so just amazingly open and welcome to all people. The one thing he did though, I don't know if you know the Chinese tradition here in Hawaii, where you dig up the bones after a certain amount of time and you put them in an ossuary in clay jars, and then you put them in a house, and so people can come and pay their respects later, for generations. And so they had this house there, and where they kept all the bones. And if you passed out too early at one of their parties, they would take you into the bone house, and they would put poi on your eyes, which, if you can imagine, after like 30 minutes, an hour, becomes like super glue. And then they would put bones across their chest. And they said these big wave surfers, would just wake up and they can't open their eyes, and they finally do, and they're bones, and they're in the bone house, and these grown men would just be screaming, And they were also outrageous. Did I mention that? Yeah. And so these were the kind of stories I collected when I was writing Eddie Ko, and it was one of the honors of my life. I wore this shirt, this is my Hokulea shirt, when I got to sail on the leg of the Malama Honua voyage a number of years ago, and I have the distinct honor of being, probably one of the worst sailors to ever step on the deck of that voyaging canoe. But I don't get seasick, and so they go, come on. And so I wanted to read something about Eddie when this is when I had been working on the book, and Nainoa invited me to sail on the Hokulea. It was just such an amazing honor, and to retrace Eddie's last route, his last voyage. And so this is called Sailing in Eddie's Wake. And the epigram is from Keats. It's his epitaph on his grave, which I love. Here lies one whose name was writ in water. Sailing out of Honolulu Harbor in darkness, I'm standing on the deck of a twin-hulled voyaging canoe called Hokulea. The canoe was modeled after the ancient Polynesian vessels that brought the first settlers to the islands of Hawaii more than 1,200 years ago. Now a crew of mostly Hawaiian sailors is taking the canoe to the island of Lanai as part of a statewide educational sail. We've been asked to take off our watches, turn off our cell phones, and leave the modern world behind. It's the middle of the night and all is quiet except for the sound of waves lapping against the hull. The city is asleep under its own constellation of burning lights, which makes it hard to see some of the stars. But the further we sail from Honolulu, the clearer they become. Nainoa Thompson, the captain, is teaching the crew how to navigate a course by mapping out the night sky and its guiding lights. Excuse me. He points out the Southern Cross, the North Star, and Hokulea, Arcturus, Hawaii's zenith star. Hokulea means star of gladness because it once guided Hawaiian voyagers home from their distant journeys across Polynesia. And now, centuries later, that voyaging spirit has been reborn in this canoe. Nainoa has invited me as a guest on the canoe to retrace the last voyage of Eddie Aikau, the Hawaiian surfer and lifeguard who was a crew member on Hokulea in 1978 when she capsized, and he was lost at sea. We are sailing on a similar canoe through the islands, though ours is only a 12-hour sail to Lanai, while theirs was to be an arduous 30-day journey to Tahiti. As the navigator of the doomed 78 voyage, Nainoa still feels partly responsible. And it's difficult for him to talk about what happened. Although it was a tragic event in his life, Nainoa also recognizes that it marked the beginning of a new era in voyaging, one that was guided by safety and education. He wants me to experience the mystical power of sailing on Hokulea, so I can better understand Eddie's dedication to the canoe and what it represented. With its V-shaped sails, long wooden hulls, and large steering paddle, the vessel looks like it sailed right out of Hawaii's past. Watching her glide across the blue water, I can see why Eddie believed the canoe was a symbol of his people's heritage and pride. About an hour and a half into the sail, we see the sun rise over the peak of Hokulea, of Haleakala on the island of Maui, where Eddie was born. The last stars dissolve in the daylight. An Eva bird hangs in the air directly over the center sail, as if tethered to the mast. In the distance, whales spout and leap out of the water like giants playing in an endless sea. As Oahu fades on the horizon, I see the islands of Maui, Molokai, and Lanai emerge from the sea like turtles. During the course of the sail, I stare at the rhythmic ocean swells and remember when I first learned about Eddie and the Hokulea. Standing on the deck of the Hokulea, I stare into the shimmering sea and think about Eddie. The swells are small, the winds are light, and as we sail along, I watch the parting wake of the canoe. We are about 20 miles south of the island of Lanai, which looks like a shadow on the horizon. Nainoa looks out at the vast expanse of water and tells me we are approaching the area where the Hokulea capsized in 1978. He looks anguished as he tells us how terrible the conditions were that day, as the stranded crew clung to the hulls of the overturned canoe. Howling winds and stormy seas, 6 sailors, and no sign of rescue in sight. Unable to watch his fellow crewmen suffer, Eddie volunteered to paddle a surfboard to the island of Lanai for help. Nainoa vividly remembers holding his hand and staring into his eyes for a few moments before Eddie paddled out of sight and into the maelstrom. Later, Nainoa tells me, at a deeper level, Eddie tried to rescue not only the crew of the Hokulea, but the symbolism and dignity of the canoe, because he knew it carried the pride of his people. 25 years later, he's still navigating all of us in the voyaging community. He reminds us our destination and why we continue to sail. In the end, Eddie's story is about hope and healing. Watching Hokulea's hulls cut through the sea, I realize we are sailing in Eddie's wake.
So I have 2 more people that I would like to thank before I then read some poems for you. First, I'd like to thank, well, it's kind of like 3 people. I'd like to thank Nom for fixing the microphone and also for setting things up before. So thank you, Nom. Thank you also to Josh. I'm not sure where Josh is, but he's the community director at the Hub. He does a fantastic job here. He's there in the back. And then lastly to Joe, who is one of my fellow hosts here at the Hub, who is recording this and has just been really, really fantastic. So Joe, another round of applause for Joe. So I pair my poems with collage, which is just taking things from magazines and from newspapers and from books that I find outside the library, anywhere really, and I just merge them together into new pictures, and I think it's a perfect metaphor for poetry because I'm still in that stage of artistic creation where I am basically all the influences that I've ever been, you know, Billy Collins and Walt Whitman and John Ashbery and everybody I've ever read is why I write poetry. Poetry begets poetry. So pairing those 2 things together creates this kind of fresh and unexpected connection between landscape and soul and the way you look at things and Yeah, so as I read these poems, just imagine what collages might go with them. I do have some collages for sale, some originals, and then I have some framed in the back as well that you can enjoy after this. First poem I'm going to start off with is a poem called Schatz. Schatz means treasure in German. Not all sonnets are love poems, and not all love poems are sonnets, but this one is. For a German man, you are handsomely open to a store-bought bagel and a roller or two. Thighs like livery, hands gowned in sinews. When you look at me, all my freckles bounce, and trust me, I do not have freckles. When you play piano, I am only half contained. Your limber finger is the other half of a fluid discussion with Bach or Gershwin. I'll never forget the first time you said, "Express yourself," and danced like a horse had lost its carriage. And marriage to you, the best of all, on surfboards with star rings and a handful of friends, in the dazzling blues of the Windward Bay, in our very non-German, non-American way. My next poem is called Salted Light and Honey. Take the alpine ibex, for example. Cobbling up the flinty cliff face, its rubber hooves robustly gripping holds as small as a mouse's nail. As rash as it is, the sheerness is worth its weight in salt. Now watch as the whale spends her meals casting up crisp currents of Pacific frost, with no repose against the undertow. To warmer waters the migrant goes to find light for her and her kin alike. Consider last the honeybee, enraptured by plumeria, fuchsias, and goldenrods, fresh candied lilies and orange blossoms sweet as a summer breeze. The further she goes, a buzz and a light, the grander her yield. As it is with these animals, so it is with mine. Heavy risk we all must take when life is on the line. So the first magazine that I started publishing for quite regularly is an online literary magazine called Jerry Jazz Musician, which publishes this nice intersection between jazz and poetry. Joe Maita is the editor there and has taught me a lot about rhythm and blues in poetry and how to do that as a white person. So this poem is the last poem that I published with Joe. It's called Stella in the Starlight. It's also going to be published in Deep Breath, forthcoming October. So, Stella in the Starlight. Stella sticks her toes in grass and she don't know the impact. The moonlight bending on the bowing blades casts dancing shadows like meandering tracks. I follow, relaxed. Stella doesn't know her own impact. She lifts a cup to her lips to drink and sets it tender on the forest floor. Shadow roses bloom underneath, smelling like hot caramel. With naught but wisps, she wraps the night in warmth. Stella doesn't know her own tact. When she walks, she makes the wind gust snow dust off the tops of pine trees to swirl around the moon like fresh cotton on an airy laundry line. The night is an electric blanket with Stella in the starlight. The editor that I'm working with to publish these, Kansas City-based publishing house called Ambitious Stories. The editor and publisher is very brilliant poet named Ravel Rogers II, and he has really encouraged me to play around with form. Those kind of visual poems, I don't know if you've ever seen them when you were in grade school, they're like in the shape of a turkey or something, and it's about turkeys. So those I thought were a little bit childish or a little bit underrated or something, but Ravel is really teaching me that poems can be whatever you want them to be. They can be only for reading aloud, they can be only for visualizing, they can be only for, etc. And that's a good lesson. Poetry should be whatever it should be, frankly. So this one is this is about a rocking horse kind of, and it's kind of in the shape of a rocking horse, and it's kind of oscillating back and forth. So as I read it, I just want you to imagine just being a little child on a rocking horse. It's called Oscillating. Like the wooden horse on its rocking mount, my heart lurches back and forth, once toward death, another toward life, once for sound and once for fury, simply for the stomach within me. Through the meadow runs a blur of tactile fur, upon which cling hooked diaspores from agrimony or burdock weeds. Spineless, nature carves a clever path. Now, looking up, I see the sky at such a savage slant that all the helpless clouds amass together, while corralling wind blows southern battles, only to cause the clouds unravel. My heart, keeps time with these, attached as it were to the godless thing that stirs the weeds, the wind, and me. So when it comes to writing and composing poems that I will call sonnets, there's a lot of tradition with the sonnet, you know. Even the American sonnets are peppered by Wanda Coleman and Terence Hayes and John Ashbery, people that are very established in the literary field. So this poem kind of addresses all of that imposter syndrome that just goes through my mind, goes through every artist's mind, and especially writers in this little fish pond of a world. So this is called Raw Materials. Each branch in the orchard swings heavy, ripe with dripping, luscious fruit the width of 4 hands. The impostor sits supremely still in the midst of this and gazes upon her garden scene. Heads of kale bulge like beer bellies, the carrots have roots like Rapunzel's hair, swollen tomatoes drag against the soiled earth, and the impostor stares at her little hands. These human hands? Only 2 of them. What's the use of 2 hands with these wealthy fruit trees? Slender palms carry nary a seed, for the seed is the whole in these hands of but 2. She watches the marigolds face the drowning rays, woeful that they lack the strength to save themselves. Silently, helplessly, the garden watches her weep. This is expansion. A world loosely viewed through thumbnail curtains will hang, suspended, unreachable to summons, but not to lordly Father Time, who tries to hold his belly full of laugh. Oh, come on, stay a while, play a while. The earth will keep on turning while you cartwheel just a little. I promise we'll take turns steering, but first we've got to see this. The universe expanding, swelling, breathing, casting shadow puppets on the planets every fortnight. See how time sits idle, puffing on his pipe? That's the signal. Swoop in and grab your life. We come now to our penultimate poem. If you have liked what you've read, I do have a couple of copies of my first book, Articulated Soul, available. And then, if you like it beyond that, I have a sign-up sheet for your email addresses. When Deep Breath comes, I will send you an email and let you know. So please put your email on that table over there. This is called Aftermath. Here lies the fate of a footfall. Late November, the woods west of Kansas City, where boot treads fade like apple dust. While foxhounds sniffed the wizened mushroom stumps from wild summer, I wandered free, till memory found a lonely pond. Gently, my gloved hands nursed a calm hello from the bark of the dogwoods, which lined the scummy lagoon like dutiful sentries. They remembered me. I stooped to search the aftermath of late afternoon, finding yellow lilies growing past first frost. The dogwoods watched as I said goodbye, then watched as my footprints joined the decay. So this last poem that I'm going to read, is the penultimate poem of the collection. And things are still kind of in this nice loose order at the moment, so things can change. Like the title is What Passes for God. That's up in the air, to be frank. So if you have any ideas, please let me know. So right now it's What Passes for God. From destiny comes our definition for curiosity. Ragged, dog-eared library books waiting for the reshelf, pockmarked and coffee stains, dimpled from backpack bike locks, theoretically loved but abused nonetheless. Or shall it be said that the catastrophe is in the glass-paned bookshelf, exquisitely barred in steel, resolutely locked high and dry, safe from the hands of an oily 7-year-old who might even give a half-frenzied damn. The poet folds her hands. She has made her choice. Let them decide what to do with it. Alright, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you so much. Feel free free to hang around, feel free to grab more drinks, more food, put your email address on the side. Stuart has some copies of his book available. We've got the Throb newsletter that you can sign up for as well. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Round of applause for everybody. Have a great night.